What are some evidences that you saw that that teacher might be generating something called learning? Okay. The students own what they're doing. What's another one? Right. They're responsible. They're responsible for generating learning. In other words, the brains that work are the brains that learn. The most important brain in the classroom that works is not the teacher's brain, it's the learner's brain. You want their brains to be the most work, or doing the most work. Your job is to inspire, their job is to perspire. Anything else? Good. Super. And you used vocabulary. Aren't you the best? It's transfer by association. You saw a deliberate, purposeful use of transfer. Good. Anything else you saw? Relevance. Why? Or how? What was relevant?
It was important. They learned.
Right. They were working how? In teams, cooperative teams, or learning teams. They were copulating. Yeah, right. I hope not. Now, here's another little saying. Many brains working together always produce better results than one brain working by itself. And it's a good thing for kids to learn and practice that. Anything else? Immediate feedback from their peers. Wonderful. You used vocabulary. Anybody see any elements of motivation? Where was the level of concern in that classroom? High or low? It was high. And as a result, she got some productivity. What if she said, well, I'll just slop around and see how you can monkey around with colors as you do these symbols? No. The level of concern is high. Also keep in mind, the research on peak performance says human beings do their best work when the level of concern is very, very high. You want the level of concern to be high. You want them to be concerned about their product. You want them to have time constraints. You want them to have quality constraints. Those are good things. Those are evidences or indicators that this teacher is operating at a certain level of effectiveness. And that's what we're looking for. Evidences that the teacher is able to generate learning in a classroom by consciously using strategies that work. We want you folks to be consciously competent professionals. The worst person to put in front of children are unconscious incompetents. Those are people that don't know they don't know what they're doing. They are a danger to children. The next level up are people who are consciously incompetent. Those are people who know they don't know what they're doing. How many of you have been there? Like your first year teaching, after 2 weeks, how many of you went home and said, I don't have a clue what I'm doing there? That's good, because at least you know you don't know what you're doing, and you can do something about it. The next level up that we want you to aspire to is conscious competence, that you know what you're doing, and why you're doing it, and how to do it. That's a great person to have in front of children. The highest level are people who are subconsciously competent. Those are people who know what to do when they don't know what to do. Think about that. They know what to do when they don't know what to do. That's subconscious competence. Next, we're going to take a rapid look at something called practice. Now, when your mommy said practice makes perfect, she was wrong. Practice has never made perfect. How many of you know drivers who are permanently imperfect? Practice makes permanent. Perfect practice makes perfect. But practice makes anything permanent. Whenever we look at practice, and by the way, if you are in middle school and you're in a performing activity, like band, choir, debate, athletics, anything where there are performances, you had better pay attention, because if you know practice, you will get great results out of your kids. If you don't know practice, you're going to be a mess, and so will your kids. The first thing you're looking for in practice is quality. And there are three things that have to be present in every single practice session, in your classroom, in the band room, on the playing fields, and that is quality of the practice by 3 M words: meaning, modeling, and monitoring. And we've come across the meaning word before, haven't we? The practice has to be meaningful to who? Students. And you have to make sure that the practice has got meaning in it. So meaning generates transfer. They're interconnected. The next one is modeling. Make sure if you're working on sentences, kids see examples of what? Superb sentences. If they're working on paragraphs, what do they need to have models of? Really well-written paragraphs. If they're doing a science experiment, what do they need to see first? A really well-conducted experiment. Now, who is the most powerful model in the classroom? You are. You are the most powerful model we ever put in front of children. So you need to model your subject. I want my math teachers to be zealots about mathematics. I want my English teachers to be apostles of English. I want my family science people to be passionate about family science, because you become a living, breathing role model to kids. And that modeling is very powerful when it comes to human learning. Next is monitoring. Monitoring means when kids are practicing, you are not at your desk working on email or on your computer or on your cell phone. You are up and moving around and monitoring the practice of kids. One teacher on her feet is worth 3 teachers on their seat. And if you're going to have high quality practices, you better be monitoring that practice. Not off in a corner doing something all by yourself. Because if you're off in a corner behind your desk, you have no idea as to what's going right or wrong in practice. So those 3 things are the first 3 things you should ask yourself when you're designing a practice. Is it meaningful? What models will I have kids see? And how will I monitor and adjust and eliminate early mistakes in practice? Then you go to the quantity questions of practice. Keep in mind, practice is always into 2 components, the quality and the quantity. So quantity answers 4 questions. First question is, how much do kids practice at one time? The answer is a small amount with meaning. Now, here we go into brain research again. Middle school kids, your kids, can handle at one time 5 to 7 bits of information. That's all. That's all. 5 to 7 bits. An adolescent brain handles about that many pieces of information at one time. So what happens, do you think, when you assign 20 vocabulary words on Monday? You just made a big oops. You should assign how many? 5. And then how many on Tuesday? 5. And then you go over Monday. And then Wednesday you assign 5 more and go over Monday, Tuesday. So you break it, and here's a word you have to know and love: chunking. You break everything into chunks. And those chunks have always 5 to 7 bits of information, no more. What's wrong with having kids learn the entire national anthem at one time? Too much what? Too many bits of information. They can't handle it. What's wrong with this? Oh, doesn't make sense. What's the smallest piece of the song that has meaning? Oh, say, can you see? 5 bits of information that has meaning. So you learn that, and then you go to the next chunk. Don't ask me to sing. Next, how long should practice sessions be? Answer: short in duration, high in intensity. You want practice sessions to be short and intense. Look at how much I've given you. I've given you 1 minute, 2 minutes at the most, because I want the intensity to be high and the duration to be short. Now, brain research says this about middle school learners. They can be expected to attend to a task up till about 9 to 11 minutes, max. So what happens if you have a 30-minute lecture? You are deceiving yourself. That's what you're doing. You need to make sure that those... Notice this middle school teacher had kids up and moving around a lot. That's a good idea, because what do those kids at this age like to do? Move, 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 move. Make sure you got some activities that involve movement. Next, how often should people practice? There's 2 parts. If you want quick learning, you do many repeats in short intervals of time. You repeat, rest, repeat, rest, repeat, rest, repeat, rest, repeat, rest. And then if you want retention, you do what's called distributed practice. So you repeat, 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 go to something else, come back, repeat, do something else, come back, repeat. An entire math series that is done very well is based on that one piece. It's called Practice, and guess what the math series is? Saxon Math. It's pretty well received, mainly because it honors practice. And then, how well do people know how they're doing during practice? What's the answer? Please say a 2-syllable word starting with F. At your table, you've got 32 seconds to say the 5 critical attributes of feedback. Go. Okay. Let me give you visually what happens in practice and have you make some sense of it. Let's say I'm standing here and I'm in a South Dakota grasslands. So I'm in a field of grass. And I want to go from here over to Sandy. So I take a walk. And I go over here. And I stop. So I've made a trip. If I look behind me, what will I see? No, I won't. I will not see a path. And no, I will not see a trail. What will I see? I will see some grass what? Bent over and a lot of grass still up. That's what happens when you do one practice session. It's called once over lightly. Now if I stand here for an hour and look back, what will I see? Nothing. It's as though I was never there, because the grass has what? Come back up. That is just exactly what happens in brains, folks. The dendrites make a tenuous connection and then it disappears. So I think, well, I'm going to go back over to these brilliant looking folks. So I make another trip. And I come over here. And I think, oh, that worked good. so I'm going to go back over to Sandy. But now I'm going to add creativity. I'm going to go like this. Or I might really get jazzy and go like this. Or I might go like this. But every time I make a trip, what am I doing? I'm building the strength of the, please say connection. Connection. And how many times do I have to go back and forth to build a path? Many times. Now, if I keep going back and forth along the path, it becomes a trail. And if I keep going back and forth along the trail, it becomes a road. And if I keep using the road, it becomes a highway. And that's what you want to do with important learning in your class. You want the dendrites and the axon to form neural highways. And the only way you're going to do it is by what? Practice and repetition, but the practice has to have 7 elements in it. Does that make sense? There's no such thing as one-shot learning. Learning requires a lot of trips. Now, in your class, some of your kids are faster trip makers than others. They have faster processors. Some of your kids are slower at taking trips. They have slower processors, but they all have the capacity. All we have to do is make sure they're using their capacity. It's just like computers. Some are faster processors than others, but they all have enormous what? Capacity. Capacity. So, when you design practices, you design in 2 dimensions, quality and quantity. Let me give you an example of why practice is so important. At UCLA, there was, for many, many years, a basketball coach who became considered to be perhaps the finest collegiate basketball coach in the history of basketball. Anybody know his name? John Wooden. How many have heard that name? An absolute superb practitioner of basketball. And John Wooden would take his team into Pauley Pavilion for practice, and they'd be practicing basketball, and the kids would say, "Coach, who's that old lady sitting up in the stands?" And he would say, "Well, that's my coach." And they'd say, "What?" He said, "Yeah, that's my coach." And that coach's name was Dr. Madeline Hunter. And for 20 years, John Wooden and Madeline Hunter had that coaching relationship. And the agreement was, if she would come and give him feedback as to the quality and the quantity of his practice and its effectiveness, he would come into her graduate classes in psychology and talk about the psychology of coaching. Raise your hand if you think that was a smart twosome. You had the finest basketball coach in the 20th century and the finest educator in the 20th century in a symbiotic relationship. How many of you think maybe that's why he did pretty well? Yeah, when you got access to that kind of feedback, you're not going to be too shabby. And when her students have access to that kind of a mind, they're going to do pretty well. So practice is an extraordinarily important thing for learning if you learn to do it well. And I'm expecting your administrators to give you feedback on the quality and the quantity of your practice sessions, because you want kids to practice as you design these elements of practice. Let me give you another story about practice. And this was told to me 2 days ago by the superintendent of schools in Chamberlain, South Dakota, Dr. Tim Mitchell. And he said that 2 years ago, he and his wife went to a conference in San Diego, and they are both golfing fans. So they noticed that there was an Accenture golf tournament out of San Diego a little bit before the conference. So they went out early and bought tickets and went to watch these highly, highly skilled professionals play. And in particular, they wanted to watch people like Mickelson and Tiger Woods and some others. So they went down the fairway ahead of the crowd. That was a huge crowd following Tiger Woods. So they went down the fairway thinking that they'll have a better chance to see him as he comes by. And it happened that he hit his shot and it landed about 2 feet from where they were standing. So Tim told his wife, no matter what happens, don't move. Just stay there. So she was close enough so she could reach out and touch him, which she wanted to do, but he said, you better not do that, because we're not going to be able to stay here and watch anything else. So they watched him how to prepare for his next shot and hit the next shot. And then they watched the tournament, and then they decided everybody was done, and so they were leaving. And as they were leaving, they had to walk past the practice area. And they walked past the practice area, and there was one golfer practicing. One. His name is Tiger Woods. Probably the best golfer of his time. And he was practicing, and he had his caddy there, his swing coach there, and another coach. So he was practicing with 3 coaches, all who were giving him what? Feedback. Do you think that might help him? And you think, he's already a superb golfer. Why does he need coaches? And the answer is, he needs coaches to give him one thing, which is feedback. Feedback is the breakfast of champions, not Wheaties. Feedback. And if you want kids in your classes to be champions, they'd better get what from you? World-class feedback. The next thing we're going to look at very quickly is reinforcement theory. Reinforcement basically is a fancy term for classroom management or behavior management. And all of you, I'm sure, are practitioners of reinforcement and classroom management. I want to just go over a couple common sense things that have meaning. First of all, the best thing that you can do is to influence behavior over time. And let me give you some sobering numbers. To change a simple behavior takes 21 days, not a trip to the principal's office. A trip to the principal's office is a band-aid to a behavior, not a change in behavior. To change a simple behavior, like blurting out an answer ahead of time, takes 21 days to change. To change a habit, like being late to school, takes 3 months, not one trip to the principal's office. So that's the bad news. The good news is you can influence behavior by doing a couple simple things. First of all, if you see a behavior you like people with their hand out at the right page, and people writing, and people with their spine kind of vertical, and people making eye contact, those are behaviors I want, because they're behaviors that are going to help learners learn. Those are things I'm going to reinforce positively. I'm going to come by this gentleman and say, way to go. That's a positive reinforcer. Now, is it effective? I don't know. I don't know until I keep teaching and turn around and he's still working, he's still learning, he's still active. Then I think, hey, that was an effective positive reinforcement. Reinforcers positively are things that you want to do to make sure kids realize they're behaving in a way that causes learning to happen. So when you see kids working at generating learning in their brain, reinforce that because that's what you want. Negative reinforcers are things you do to influence behaviors that you don't want. For example, if I come walking up here and I look and I see this young lady taking her elbow and hitting this young lady, that's a behavior I don't want because she's not learning and she's getting in her way of learning. So I'm going to apply a negative reinforcer. I'm going to come up and do the look. Okay? Now, do you get the message? Sure. Is it an effective negative reinforcer? I don't know. I don't know till when. A little while later, and I glance back, and now I see her, she's got her elbow to herself, and I think, hey, that might have been an effective negative reinforcer because the behavior I don't want is being diminished. But when you apply a negative reinforcer, you've got to watch out to make sure she doesn't use another behavior that's worse than the one she's trying to get rid of. Because now I look back and she's not elbowing her friend, but she's rubbing her eye. She's going like this. And I think, oh, I didn't want that. So now I have to go over and negatively reinforce that. And then I have to see how that works. You never know if your reinforcers are positive until you see the next behavior. Extinction means that if you see behaviors that are not dramatic but are kind of getting in the way. For example, if I ask a question and somebody always got their hand up before the question gets completed. You have kids like that in your school? And you'll say, well, what do you think? And the hand is up. They have no idea what the question is, but their hand is up. Well, that's not a behavior you want. So here's a little trick. When you see the kid's hand going up, deliberately and purposely turn your back to the kid and ignore the behavior. And sooner or later, they'll get the idea, ooh, she's never going to look at me unless I keep my hand up. So they're going to self-correct. That's extinction. Now, all three of these have one thing in common. What is it? Who chooses the behavior? The learner, the student, not you. And if teachers would just understand this, life would be a lot better. What you're trying to get kids to do is to choose behaviors that work. What is life about? Choosing what? Choosing behaviors that work. That's called life. Do you think that might transfer if they learned it in school? Yeah. But the critical attribute of all of these things is choice. They get to choose the behavior. Now watch the next one. What makes punishment punishment? Elimination of what? Choice. What makes a prison a prison? No choice. When you go to prison, you don't get to choose what to wear, what to eat, when the lights come on, when the lights go off, when you go outside, when you stay inside. In other words, prison is called the elimination of choice. That's called punishment. If I come up to her and say, young lady, I'll see you in my office at 3:45. What have I just eliminated? What she's going to choose to do at 3:45. I am now into what? Punishment. And you have to understand this, that anytime you take away choice, you are punishing. If you say, get to that office, you've just taken away what? Choice. They don't get to choose where they want to go. You're sending them. That's called a punishment. Now here comes a biggie. Reinforcers over time produce much, much better results than punishing does. Reinforcement influences behavior much better than punishing does. What do you think is the recidivism rate in prisons? People that come back for more. 72%. What do you think the recidivism rate is in your middle school for kids that do the same bad behavior again? 72%. Why? Because we punish. We haven't influenced behavior. So the idea is to give kids choices, but make them accountable and responsible for what? The choice. That's called reinforcement. The schedule of reinforcers, if you want behavior to change temporarily, you do many reinforcers in a short amount of time, just like practice. And if you want behaviors to move toward permanence, you keep distributing the reinforcers. Again, how long does it take to influence or change a simple behavior? 21 days. How many of you are not willing to hang in there with a kid for 21 days? You aren't not likely to make a change. You got to hang in there. When you send a kid to the office, what are you expecting? A quick fix, right? And punishment. You want that administrator to mete out punishment. That's not going to change your behavior. Now, here are a couple things that might cause some of you to say yes and some of you to just go, ooh. And here it is. And I'll be very, very honest. If you analyze the people who send kids to the office, you will find a high correlation between teacher effectiveness and the amount of kids that get sent to the office from that teacher's class. Highly effective teachers rarely send a student to the office. Ineffective teachers send a lot of kids to the principal. So there is a great correlation between teacher effectiveness and student behavior in a classroom. Think about that. Just think about that. Now, you also have to know what's called the Pareto principle. How many know the Pareto principle of economics? 20% of your kids cause you 80% of your turmoil. True or false? Absolutely. 20% of your kids cause you 80% of your anguish. Also in a classroom, 20% of your kids are responsible for 80% of the productivity in that classroom. It's kind of interesting. Here are what I think are a couple of common sense aspects to behavior that have meaning. First of all, identify what you want kids to do. Make sure kids know what behaviors are desired, like coming to class on time, coming with all the materials, coming with the right attitude. Those are all behaviors that you want. And by the way, state your behaviors in terms of do's. Be careful not to state your behaviors in terms of don'ts. Let me give you a quick example. Put your pens down. Eyes on me. Pay attention. Ready? Don't see a big white polar bear walking across the ice with a floppy fish in his mouth. How many disobeyed? Raise your hand. Over half the class disobeyed me. What did I tell you to do? Don't see a big white polar bear walking across the ice with a floppy fish in his mouth. How big was that fish you weren't supposed to see? Pretty big. This big. Do you have a bigger one? How big was yours? Woo! A little bigger. What color was that fish you weren't supposed to see? Speckled trout. They don't live in the Arctic, but that's okay. How many had the bear in a nice sunny day? Yeah. How many had the bear in a kind of a cloudy, snowy day? Yeah. Now, what did your brain do in less than 4 seconds? It not only disobeyed me, but it determined the size of the fish, the color of the fish, and a kind of the day the bear was in. In other words, you formed an entire picture in less than 4 seconds. Now, watch this. Ready? Pens down, eyes up. see a big white polar bear walking across the ice with a floppy fish in his mouth. How many saw the same thing? So watch out when you tell kids don't. How many of you had a little kid at home, like 2 years old? And you go up and say, don't go in that closet! And what happens as soon as you turn around? Whoosh! Why? They gotta know why they're not supposed to go in there. The same is true when you tell kids in class, don't do something. They form, and we don't know why this happens. It's a mystery in the brain. It forms a reverse image. It just does a flopperoo. We don't know why, but it does. You're better off to state things in terms of do's. Watch out for the don't word. It's relatively ineffective, even detrimental when it changes behaviors. Next. Make sure you think ahead of time what reinforcers are going to be effective. You got to know your kids. You got to know what they're going to respond to ahead of time for reinforcers, so you have them ready to go, because you're always going to need them. Every teacher does. So have a bag of reinforcers so you can pull one out that you think is a good one, rather than fly by the seat of your pants. Next, provide practice. If you want kids to walk down the hallway without hitting anybody, what do you have to have them do? Practice. Let's go out and walk down the hallway and don't hit somebody. Or if you want kids to practice coming to class on time, what do they have to do? Practice getting to class. If you want them to bring the right materials, they have to have opportunities to what? Practice. Practice what you want, and make sure you have kids practice. At one time in my teaching career, teaching career was over. I was an administrator. I was the director of training and instruction for the St. Paul Public Schools. And I went to Highland Park High School to talk about some training and development things, and a grizzled old teacher came up to me and said, you know, easy for you, because you don't have to teach in this hellhole. You get to escape. And I thought, ooh, he's got an attitude. But he made a valid point. So I said, maybe in a moment of weakness, I said, okay, next semester, this was in November, I said, next semester I'll come up and I'll teach a class. You just give me some kids, and I'll come up and I'll teach this. It was an integrated thematic active learning class, action class, for 9th through 12th graders called Succeeding. And it was based on the question, what are the skills, habits, and attitudes of successful people? How many think that might be a kind of an interesting class? Yeah, it was. And so I started teaching that class in January. I had 27 of the most incredibly dysfunctional kids you have ever seen. I had kids in there who were arsonists. I had kids in there who are on parole. I had kids in there who were selling drugs. I had kids in there that the judge told them to make a choice, school or jail. Well, they chose school, unfortunately. So they were in my class. 27 of these kids. And the first day I walked in there, and I was ready to go, I was enthused, and the kids came in, and I don't know if you've ever watched some of your kids and how they come to class. They don't walk, they slither. You ever notice that? Their feet never leave the ground. They slither. So most of these kids were world-class slitherers. So they slid in, and then they go like this. And they go into a self-induced coma that lasts 44 minutes. And then they kind of get out of it so they can slither to the next class. So my first day was an absolute disaster. I mean, it was brutal. I went home and I thought, man. And I was teaching this class during my lunch hour. So I thought, maybe the only thing that's going to happen is I'm going to lose a little weight. So I got home, and I had a glass of wine, and I thought, what am I going to do tomorrow? Well, first question was, am I going to show up? So I thought, okay. So the second day came, same thing. Worse than the first day. Came home, had another glass of wine, and I thought, I'm either going to drink a lot of wine or I'm going to fix this stuff. So then I thought, wait a minute, I'm supposed to know what to do when I don't know what to do. And I didn't know what to do. So the third day came, same thing. Half of them come in late. Out of 27, there's 14. finished slithering in, and I said, "Stop!" And they, "What?" And I said, "Let's all go in the hallway." And they thought, "What?" I said, "Yep, get up, go in the hallway." So I took them all out in the hallway. Teachers on either side of me slammed their doors shut. They thought I was giving them back. And I took them in the hallway and I said, "Let's practice." I said, "I want you to pretend that you're excited to be here. I want you to fake me out in letting me know that you really want to be here. I want you to pretend you're a learner. I want you to pretend you actually know how to learn." And they were kind of giggling and chuckling. And I said, "I'm going to stand by the door and I'm going to pretend I like you. And I'm going to pretend I want to be here. And I want to pretend I'm capable of teaching you." So then they had this glazed look on their face, but they were all awake. So I said, "Okay, I'm going to give you about 10 seconds to fake me out. And I'm going to stand by the door and I'm going to get ready for 10 seconds and I'm going to fake you out." So they said, "Okay, time for school." And the first kid walks by me and I say, "Good morning, good to see you." And the next kid. And amazingly, their feet left the ground. They were actually stepping. And they got in, took a seat, and their spines were almost vertical. So I said, "Okay." And it only lasted 10 seconds. I said, "Let's go back," and we tried it again. And we tried it again. And we tried it again. And we ended up, that whole first month was practicing functional behaviors. We practiced how to ask a question. We practiced how to shake hands. We practiced how to make eye contact. We practiced how to sit next to somebody without hitting them in the mouth. And we practiced. That's all we did, was practice some basic little functional behaviors. And then we got to practice more advanced behaviors, like taking a note, or opening your book, or working together. We practiced, I'll bet 60 times, working in a group of 4 politely. But we were making progress. And one of the things we did, because it was called Succeeding, we brought in a speaker every week, a person who was highly successful. And they represented different ethnicities, different ages, different genders, different businesses. But you learn very quickly that you have to filter out who they want to talk to. Well, some kids wanted to talk to a judge, and that was because they wanted free advice before they got to one. So I didn't know, you're not going to do that. So they wanted to interview people like a nurse, a business person, a person who was teaching college, a person who owned and operated their own small business. So we had about 12 different people, and one of them they wanted to interview was a politician. And at that time, Senator Paul Wellstone was a senator in Minnesota, and his headquarters were in St. Paul. And the building principal knew his executive secretary, a black lady named Bee. And she said, "Bee, would you mind coming and talking about what it's like to work for a United States senator?" So she agreed to do that. Now, we had practiced, and I'll give you the extent to which we practiced. We practiced how to ask questions. And we also practiced what questions to ask, because you never, ever, ever, ever leave room for spontaneity. Never. Everything is choreographed. So you would always ask the first question, which we agreed to. She would ask the second question. She would ask the third question. And they all knew who they followed. So B came to our school that day, and I sent 2 people down to meet her. 2, because if you send 1, they don't come back. You send 2. And we practiced, how do you meet somebody? How do you step forward and say, "Hello, my name is..." We had practiced that maybe 20 times. So they introduced themselves to B, brought her up to the class, introduced her to the class. That took more practice. She sat on a little stool. We had the video camera going. We videotaped every person, because the kids had to use the videotapes to see what all these people had in common. That was action research, because I wanted them to think about what these disparate professionals all had in common that caused them to be successes. What are their skills, habits, and attitudes? So B sat down, and guess who asked the first question? You did. Why? She's been doing it all semester. Guess who asked the second one? You did. Guess who the third one was? So we went around the room asking questions, and B responded. And then at the end, we gave her a round of applause. Guess what we had to do? We had to practice how you do this. Because their round of applause before was, we didn't want that. So we practiced how adults actually put hands together. So they did. And then I took her to the door and I expressed my thanks for having her come here and visit us. And she said, you know, Ed, it is such a privilege to be in a gifted classroom. I couldn't believe it. I walked back in there when she was out of ear range, and I said, you won't believe what she called you. And first they, what? And I said, she called you gifted, and they just roared. And I said, you know what? You are. Because you had a very successful, bright woman, and you fooled her into thinking you were gifted. By what? By behaviors. It's amazing. By the end of that semester, we had a better attendance average than the whole school did. Everybody passed the class. Not all A's and B's, mostly barely making it, but they made it. And it wasn't a home run, but at least we got kids on base. And the reason was we just abandoned the curriculum and took advantage of practicing things that were getting in their way. And it worked out pretty well. But it took a huge amount of time. Oops, let me back this up. Next, make sure you're flexible. Kids are going to make some oopses. How many, especially middle schoolers, every day. Be patient. Change takes time. How long for a simple behavior? 21 days. How long to change a habit? 3 months. That's called a semester. That's a long time. And then acknowledge progress in the desired direction. Don't wait for perfection because it'll never arrive. You will retire before then. So acknowledge progress. If kids are getting to school almost on time, congratulate them. And here's a giant. Always give them feedback about the efforts they're making. The work they're doing to get there on time. You'll say, gee, you worked hard to get there almost on time today. Good for you. Now that's a positive reinforcer. They didn't make it on time, but they're making what? They're making progress. They're making progress. Middle school kids are a human being in progress. They're not there yet. And you're much more expert at that than I am. But they're in the process of making themselves what they are. And we need to acknowledge what? The efforts they're making to make the progress. Retention is simple because you've all seen these words before. Now, can you guarantee a student will remember something? No. There's too many variables. Nobody can guarantee you're going to remember a certain thing. I can't guarantee you're going to remember a certain amount because there's too many variables. But I can do some things to make it more likely you might remember some things. First of all, if I attach meaning to something, it's going to increase the chances you can remember. If I use a positive feeling tone, it's going to help remember because I'm generating in your brain a positive emotion that's going to attach to the learning. If I use transfer, if I use elements of transfer like critical attributes. By the way, how many of you notice that everything I put on the screen always has 5 to 7 bits of information? Why? Because I know you can handle that much at one time. Not saying you're middle schoolers, but adults only handle 7 to 9 bits. Not much more than middle schoolers. 7 to 9 bits is all you can handle at one time. So everything I put up on the screen is always within that framework because I want to make it manageable. Next, degree of original learning. I'm not teaching a whole bunch of all kinds of stuff, but I'm trying to generate a degree of original learning. We're not going to finish today. We just aren't. Am I going to lose sleep over that? No. Because I want to make sure that what we do work on, you learn. Now, if I get through everything and you only learn the first 50%, I just wasted 50%. I'd rather do 50% and have you learn it than scurry through 100% and have you learn 25%. It doesn't make sense. And then I want to make sure you have enough time to practice. Practice using words. Practice working together. Practice behaviors that are important. One last comment about behavior. I'm a great fan of a common code of conduct for schools. I liked it when my staff and I would sit down and we would agree on a common code of conduct for all adults in the building. Adults in the building, not kids, adults. Why? Modeling. What do kids need to see? Functional adults. What might they see a lot of at home? Non-functional adults in some cases. So I want everybody in school to agree to how we will behave. 4 or 5 behaviors that everybody agrees to. A common code of conduct. I'm also in favor of a school sitting down and talking about a common code of conduct for the kids. That's the same as the adults. So everybody gets to what? Practice. Everybody gets to practice. No matter if you're 50 or 13, you still get to practice behaviors. And kids get to see behaviors. Just think of this. If every classroom is allowed to have their own list of behaviors, kids are expected to change behavior every 45 minutes. Do you realize how tough that is? I don't think there's adults that can do that. So you're better off to have the same behaviors all day long, and then they can practice those behaviors. And it doesn't have to be 40 of them, just 5 to 7. 5 to 7 behaviors, that's all you need. The next piece we're going to take a look at is something that you might not have run into a lot, but it's very, very, very important. And this will be the last piece we're going to take today. And this is called attribution. Attributionists study how people explain their results in life. They study how you explain your successes. And they study how people explain their failures or their setbacks. Wouldn't that be an interesting field of study? And we come to find that there are 4 major ways in which people explain the results they get in life. How many have heard a middle school kid come up to you and say, you know, I'm just not good at math. My mom said she wasn't very good either, and she told me my dad wasn't good either, so I'm not very good at math. Now, what are they attributing their lack of success to mathematically? Native ability. I don't have the what? I don't have the native ability to do math, so don't blame me. How many have heard kids with that line? Or you come up to a student and you say, wow, that was a nice experiment you did for your science project. And the kid said, oh, thank God it was a new moon. What are they attributing their success to? Luck. Or how many have heard a kid come up to you and say, oh, that homework was way too hard for me. I just couldn't do it. What are they explaining their lack of success to? Difficulty of task. Don't blame me. The task was too hard. The one thing, the one characteristic of attribution that you have control over is what? Effort. the amount of work you're willing to put into a project. It's effort. Now, what is it you want to celebrate in your classes? Work, effort. The first year I ran across attribution and started studying it and realized it had a lot to say about schools. My son was a sophomore in high school, and he came home. I was in the same high school. And he came home with a report card. I knew he was going to. So I asked the question, a lot of good parents, I said, how'd you do? And he answered like a typical 10th grader, okay. And I said, well, let's see what okay means. I was looking for specificity. So I opened the report card, and I scanned down it, and my eyes stopped on one line. English, D. And in my best non-judgmental voice, I said, what the hell is this? The first thing out of his mouth, listen to this one. The first thing out of his mouth was, hey, look who I got for a teacher. I got Mrs. Grinch. She's the toughest, meanest, hardest teacher in the whole English department. What's he attributing the D to? Which of the four? Luck. Why? He got Mrs. Grinch. He just got unlucky. He didn't get Mrs. Nice. So don't blame Todd because of bad luck. So then, because I know a little bit now, and you do the same thing, by the way, you ask questions. Did everybody in Mrs. Grinch's class get a D? Well, he didn't want to talk about that. Did some people get A's and B's? He didn't want to talk about that either. So he goes to the next one. Hey, have you seen the book? It's this thick, big words, no pictures. What's he attributing the D to? Task difficulty. Don't blame him. The task is too what? Hard. So then I ask, what? Questions. Does anybody in your class know what the words mean? Does everybody have trouble reading the same story you're having trouble with? He didn't want to talk about that. Because he knows I'm not buying his attribute. So then he goes to the next one. Hey, Mom said you weren't so hot either in school. I didn't swim out of a deep gene pool. It was pretty shallow. Now what's he blaming the D to? Native ability. Don't blame him. He's a victim of impaired genetics. So then because I know a little about attribution, I say, well, it seems like your two sisters swam out of the same pool a couple years before you got in it. And it seems like they went to the same class. And it seems like they got the book done and got the grades done. Well, I didn't want to talk about that either. But what is he avoiding at all costs? Effort. So guess what I do? I go to where? Effort. How much time are you putting in? Have you gone to Mrs. Grinch for help? Have you gone and spent some study time with your friends? Have you asked for help from me? Now all of that requires what? Effort. And he wants to avoid that at all costs. And I would recommend you do the same with your kids. Always go back to the one thing that they can control. The one thing that makes the difference, and that is always what? Effort. Now, here's a scary question. Of the four, which is the one we celebrate in school? Which one of the four do we celebrate best in American schools? Native ability. That is wrong. Some kids are going to succeed despite what you do because they've got an enormous intellect or drive or desire. Some kids in your middle schools will never, ever, ever make an honor roll. True or false? Through no fault of their own. They just will not. Is that fair? We've got to do better, folks, than just celebrating something you have no control over. When you think about it, you don't control native ability. It's non-controllable. But you can control one of the four. What percent of kids would be eligible to make an effort on a roll? 100% of kids would have the opportunity to make an effort on a roll. Can you measure effort? Yes. Can you recognize effort being made? Yes. Can you recognize kids who are working at a task? Yes, you can. I mean, it's not a secret science. It makes a difference. Now, here's the biggest question of all. Of the four, which is the greatest determiner to success in life? What do businesses celebrate most? Effort. Let me read you something. This came out in the Minneapolis Star and Tribune in August of 2007. And a friend of mine sent this and said, Ed, you might enjoy this article. And the name of the article was, They Took the Title and Much More. And the reporter had gone way back in history and looked to see which was the first year in which girls could compete interscholastically in the state of Minnesota. And it was 1997. No, 1977. 30 years ago. 30 years ago. 1977 was the first year they acknowledged state championships. So he looked to see which girls team won the state championship in swimming in 1977. And then he followed as many of those girls as he could to find out what they were doing today and did they remember anything about that event. And he found several of the girls and looked them up, and I'll read quickly their responses. The first girl is named Karen, and here's what she said. Being on that team provided a good foundation for a lot of the things I did in life. I think more about the discipline, dedication, and hard work than I do the moment of winning. Girl named Kim. Being part of a state champion is something you never forget. I think back on the hard work, the goals you set. A girl named Laura. Swimming on a successful team helped secure a scholarship at Northwestern. And it's fun to share the work and the memories with my kids. A girl named Debbie. It created such a strong work ethic that really set the tone for me and led me to earn and own my own business. A girl named Marcy. Everybody on that 77 team did what was asked of them. There were many dedicated, hardworking, high-achieving girls. A girl named Elizabeth. That experience provided a couple of pivotal points, she said. For one, it was a confidence builder. It also proved the value of hard work, setting goals, and achieving them. A girl named Laura. It was good from the standpoint of participating with teammates so driven and willing to work. It doesn't surprise me at all that these women went on and achieved success after high school. And I read that, and I read it again, and I got a couple of tears in my eyes because I coached that team. They were my ladies. And I thought, isn't it amazing, after 30 years, 3 decades, what is it that they all said that you just heard? Hard work and effort. In other words, what transferred from that group of kids, high achieving, into their lives? Effort. The expenditure of effort. The willingness to work is the thing they took with them. And I thought, man. And isn't it interesting, in this entire article, they never mentioned the coach. And that's great, because your job and my job is to be a guide on the side. And the kids are what? The rage on the stage. And in your classroom, you are what? You're the guide on the side. You're not the rage on the stage. Let the kids be the rage on the stage, and you be the guide on the side. And let them take the credit for what? The expenditure of effort. Now you're going to do a semifinal exam. And I want you to watch one more middle school teacher. This one is teaching language arts. And I want you to see how many things this teacher is doing that's causing learning to happen in that classroom, and see if you can put some labels on it. See if you can use some vocabulary based on what we worked on this morning. So get ready to go, and I'll get this teacher ready to go.
Okay, we're going to begin today, December 10th. We're going to begin with the oral today, daily oral language, and the 2 sentences are on the board.
These middle school students start 3 mornings each week by correcting grammar and punctuation in sentences teacher Marilyn Payne writes on the board.
Number 1 is, the Yolanda thought out loud, Aunt Tiny takes good care of Andrew and I. And number 2 is, me and Andrew are going to wax the skateboarders. Brag, Carl. Generally, when the kids come in the classroom on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, there are 2 sentences up on the overhead. And I try to use a subject that's meaningful to the kids. And the kind of errors that I focus on are things that I see the kids doing pretty consistently, the inaccuracies from their writing. In my experience, 6th graders really need the safety of routine. There's so much change in their lives, particularly moving to middle school. The transition and the changes are incredible, and the physical maturation that happens. So what I found, whatever I do instructionally, the more routine it is, the more predictable it is, the structure, the safer the kids feel, the more responsibility they learn to take on in the routine itself, so that you can move more dynamically with skills. Kaylin, would you take number 1, please? Do you have a marker? We have a chart so that every child knows when it's his or her turn to be teacher. I model the whole process of being the teacher and going up to the overhead with the chart paper and making the changes. And at the beginning of the year, I introduced the proofreading symbols that I think are so important for kids as they learn to revise their own writing.
Any other anything to be changed? David?
Yeah, there needs to be a comma after loud in the second line.
Why?
Because it's just about to start quotes.
Okay, so take care of the 7 quotation marks too.
Oh yeah, and then there are quotation marks going between after the comma towards and.
A comma after loud? And quotation. And did you say after I at the end?
Yeah.
Nikki?
In the last line, Andrew needs to be capitalized because it's a proper noun.
Okay. Anybody else? Danielle?
In the second line, Teen and Tiny needs to be capitalized because it's a name.
Any other suggestions? Jessica? I, at the end of the sentence, I should be me.
Why?
Because you have to,
What's the test for that? Remember the test we did yesterday?
you have to take out the other person and put your name.
Can you read it that way? Can you stand up and read it that way?
Okay. Yolanda thought out loud, Aunt Teeny takes good care of me. Not I.
Okay, got it.
Okay. Anybody else?
Are there any other errors in the sentence that anyone sees? Let me read it to you again to make sure. Yolanda thought out loud, Aunt Tiny takes good care of Andrew and me. Is that correct now? Okay, we have consensus. That's right. Let's go on to number 2. And Nikki, you're the teacher for number 2.
Okay. Me and Andrew are going to watch the skateboarders, right, Carl? Anyone have any corrections?
Me should be I, and Andrew and I should be switched. So Andrew is first and I is after the and.
Can you read it for us, Tony?
Okay, Andrew and I are going to watch the skateboarders, correct?
What's the test for that?
Me am going to watch the skateboarders, but that doesn't make sense, so you would say I am going to watch the skateboarders.
Excellent. You got it.
So Andrew goes where me is, and me should be changed to I?
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any more changes? Ashley?
There needs to be a quotation marks before Andrew, because they're saying something.
Read what Carlos said.
Andrew and I are going to watch the skateboarders.
Okay, so where would the quotation marks go?
Before, Andrew.
Absolutely, that's where one side would go.
And, after skateboarders.
Yeah, excellent. You got it. Good job.
Should I put the other one before the color or after?
After.
Okay, so we have Andrew and I are going to watch the skateboarders. Bragg, Ged, Carl. There's something missing there that we were talking about. How you divide words into syllables.
Yeah, there has to be, the word has to be divided by syllables when you break it into a new line.
Is it already divided into syllables?
Yes.
Okay.
So you need a slash after brag.
Cordell has an idea about what you call that. Cordell?
It's a hyphen.
That's right.
So I have to put a hyphen after brag?
And that what does that show? When you put the hyphen there, what does that show?
Okay, it means that the word is like divided into two parts and it's divided into syllables.
That's right. Are there any more errors? Okay, the consensus is that the sentence is not correct. That's right. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Nikki.
I think teachers tend to take on too much themselves and think, well, I have to give the feedback, I have to evaluate, I have to know how to do it, I have to communicate to them. And what I found is that kids can do a lot of that for themselves. They get better at it the more you ask them to do it. I find giving kids more responsibility to know how they're doing and to know how their neighbor's doing and being able to communicate that provides an opportunity for them to grow as users of language, whether they're reading or writing or speaking or listening.
At your table, see if you can come up with at least 5 to 6 things this teacher's doing that is generating learning in that classroom. And you have to use the right vocabulary. Go. We were able to identify some indicators that this teacher is generating learning in that classroom. And we're able to put a label on it. Good. Let me leave you with two things. If you go to the second last page of your handout, the second last page, and I want you to read that little thing written by Helen Keller. And after you have a marvelous 3-day weekend, 4-day weekend, 4-day weekend. Notice how quickly I got corrected. A 4-day weekend. I want you to think about that the first morning you come back to school. And then on the last page, there's a reflection and analysis. And if you'd like to take a few minutes to fill that out and hand that to one of your principals or assistant principals, or just put it on that table back there where you came in, that would be superb. And let me leave you with one last thing regarding feedback. Pay attention. I got this piece of feedback in August of 2008. And I got it on my email. And here it was. Dear Mr. Porthan, I recently had a conversation with a friend about people who touched our lives. In contemplating these people in my own life, I realized that you were one of those people. In 1980, I was in your outdoor education program at Irondale. I was among the lucky ones at a time when education was more than learning how to take a standardized test. My own 16-year-old daughter does not have the opportunity to explore in a class setting the way I did at age 16. Your class gave a very insecure but curious girl the courage to search for adventure throughout her adult years. I still remember the peace I felt the 1 hour a week you allowed us to sit quietly in the woods behind our school. I remember the name of my spot, my thinking spot. Trite and childish, but nevertheless an important place for me during a time of great turmoil. I was completely inspired by the class, writing silly poetry, learning to appreciate the little worlds around me, experiencing the thrill of cooking in a Dutch oven, putting up a tent on the football field on a cold, windy day, learning to read a compass, and just feeling I could take whatever the world sent my way. My life since has taken many turns, but 9 years ago, my husband and I started a nature guide service in the Great Smoky Mountain National Park called A Walk in the Woods. One of my favorite experiences as an educator is to open up today's children to experiencing a sense of wonder and adventure in nature. Every day I'm reminded how lucky I am to work in doing something that in a small way makes our world a better place. I believe that your class was instrumental in eventually finding my way back to the earth. I don't think we take the time in today's society to remember and honor those who are important to us. And so, Mr. Porthan, I'm glad I was able to track you down and thank you and tell you that your program was instrumental in my life and hopefully in some of the 25,000 people that we have taken for a walk in the woods. That's called feedback. I had to wait 27 years. But the wait was worth it. God bless you and the work you do on behalf of kids, and I hope you had a morning that had one takeaway. Thank you.